Well, welcome everybody, and I appreciate you coming to learn a little bit about Tranquility, which is a private child life practice. And my name is Leah Yazmer, and today I'm going to discuss about Tranquility and how I support children and families through grief and loss. First, I wanted to do a little summary about what a child life specialist is for those of you who are not familiar. Child life specialists are certified professionals that have a degree in child development, psychology, and/or related fields. In the healthcare environment, child life specialists collaborate with the medical team to provide children with diagnostic education, procedural preparation and support, relaxation techniques, sibling education, and end of life support. Child life specialists help to normalize the hospital environment through developmentally appropriate play and expressive opportunities to help the children cope during their hospital stay. In the community, child life specialists continue to support children and their families to reduce the gap from the hospital support to the home, which is my goal in Tranquility. Next. A little bit about myself. Like I said, my name is Leah Yazmer. I received my bachelor's degree from Wheelock College in 2009 in human growth and development, psychology, and a concentration in child life. I have 15 years experience at Yale New Haven Children's Hospital, helping children and their families at the most difficult time in their lives. I have worked in the pediatric intensive care unit and various outpatient clinics. I am currently per diem at Yale, working in clinical units across the healthcare system as needed. I currently reside in Madison with my husband, Devin, and my 3 children. I do the hospital in addition to my private practice, Tranquility. Next. When I receive a call to help and support a child who has lost a loved one, I always begin by educating the family and the parents on the developmental stages and reaction to death. This is my foundation for how I provide my intervention, so I thought it would be helpful to review this. Infant and toddlers, they do not understand death. They sense a change in their environment and the feelings of a caregivers, they can notice that and sense that. There will be a change in their behavior possibly. It's extremely helpful for the adults in their lives to maintain the routine for the children and provide them with that emotional support and try to provide a calm present as much as possible. Helping these children identify their emotions that are observed can help put a name to the feeling that the child may be having as a toddler. So if you see a toddler potentially crying, you can say, I see you have some tears. Are you feeling a little bit sad? And vice versa for the adult. When the adults are crying or if they're happy, putting a name to the feeling that they're observing. Preschoolers, they view death as reversible and not permanent. They're in the magical thinking stage. For instance, if they were fighting with their brother or sister in the morning and then something tragic happened and their sibling passed away, they may think that they caused that death. So you would ask, they're going to ask those questions over and over again, which is extremely exhausting for the caregivers. And I try to explain that to them that this is age appropriate, but they're going to ask the question over and over again. They're going to try to find that person and look for them. They could have a change in their sleep pattern and a fear of abandonment. Imagine that the person that has recently died left for an errand and never came home. They will benefit from clear, concrete explanations. Their routine is important. If they went to a preschool or a nursery school, having them continue to attend that is going to help them with their healing process. They like to play out their emotions. So engaging in typical play of what they enjoy, whether or not it's Legos or dramatic play, they may start to feel through their play, and their play may show how they're feeling, and that can be a great conversation starter. A school-age child understands that death is permanent, and they may ask for more details. They're concerned that it's going to occur again, possibly, and they're going to have difficulty focusing at school and at home and start to begin to act more withdrawn. Physical complaints. So you may see them starting to say that they have a headache or a stomach ache and they just don't feel well, and their body is taking on those feelings. Honest information is very helpful. Expressive activities, so the kids may not know how to verbalize everything that they're processing, but engaging in hands-on expressive activities definitely can help, as well as taking part in memory-making activities to remember the loved one that has died and helping them process that grief. Adolescents, death is permanent. They're trying to understand the meaning of life and why this may have happened. They return to their friends for support. They may be more withdrawn, engaging in risky behaviors. If they currently didn't do drugs or drinking, they may start to engage in those risky behaviors. So it's important to be aware of that. They could have difficulty focusing and a lack of sleep. They tend to hide their feelings and participate in self blame. If there's local support groups, extremely helpful to get them connected and giving them those facts, as well as the expressive activities they can also engage in and begin to process their grief through those activities that help them process it and feel a little bit more comfort with what they're feeling. And validating their feelings, letting them know that you as an adult also have those feelings and that it's a normal way to feel. Next. So I wanted to do a little summary about how I provide as a child life specialist support before a death occurs, and then I'll go into some case scenarios. So first, I always begin with education. Beginning with an age-appropriate book is a great conversation starter. So if I'm going to meet with children who have recently lost a loved one and they're toddlers or they're school age, I'm going to find an age-appropriate book that they can engage with to kind of open that conversation and see if they have any understanding of why I may be with them and what is going on. And I always explain what it means when someone is dying. Discussing the body in age appropriate language is very helpful. And if there's a medical reason for why the person has died, it's important to discuss this. If there are machines that are keeping the person alive, explaining what machines are helping that person and what is going on with them in the healthcare environment. If a trauma occurs, such as a car accident another type of trauma, explaining that that is the cause of death and that is what has happened. I always say it's extremely important to assess the children where they are at. Some children may not be ready to discuss it, and that's okay. I always assess them through conversation and through reading their body language and offer them breaks as needed. Breaks are extremely important because a child is not going to open up if they're feeling forced. Asking open-ended questions is extremely important because children may have heard adults on the phone or heard conversations or just be thinking something, and asking them, well, do you know what this means? Or do you know what happened, to kind of assess their understanding as well as clearing up any misconceptions. Sometimes the children are going to ask, well, are they in heaven? And it's hard to explain depending on the religion and the faith of the family. But if they ask you, what does heaven look like? I always say, well, what do you think it looks like? Can we draw a picture of what heaven looks like, to allow the children a sense of opening up their feelings and starting that conversation in a hands-on way? They want to know, are they going to see them again? Well, it depends on the situation. They're not going to see them alive necessarily if they've already died, but they may see the body at a funeral. They may see the casket. And so it's important to prepare them, because oftentimes we say you're not going to see them ever again, but then they go to a funeral and they see an open casket. And so they do see them, but they may have not see them alive. If they're going to go see somebody who's maybe on home on hospice, they're going to go visit them, but they may not be alert and coherent. And so explaining to them that this is what's going to look like prior to that person dying. And they also can go visit at the hospital. So they will see them potentially if they're hooked up to machines, and there will be withdrawal of support. So it's important to always be careful with your ways of wording. They want to know, well, what's going to happen to their body. So if the person's at home and has died on hospice, explaining where their body is going to in age appropriate language and explaining that. If the person is in the hospital, you're going to kind of walk them through that process. And then if there's going to be the funeral and the memorial and the graveside or cremation. So always meeting the child where they're at and what is specific to their situation. I always try to explain, as you can see on the screen, the caterpillar explanation. So when children are going to see a loved one and that person may be in a casket, I always say, imagine a caterpillar who has gone into a cocoon. That caterpillar has now become a butterfly and left the cocoon. So all you see is the empty cocoon. It's the shell. The thing that made it the caterpillar, that made it the butterfly, has left the shell. The same thing with a person who has died. The person's personalities, the person who they were, are no longer in that person. They're always in their heart. When that's just the shell of the person, or just the casket of the person, or the urn if they're cremated. When you're going to be preparing a child to potentially go visit someone at the hospital, it's important to help them understand, well, can I talk to them? Absolutely. I always encourage children to talk to the loved one. Whether or not they're going to respond, I always say that you are welcome to go read them a letter, read them a book, but you can talk to them. And then they're going to ask, can they hear? And it's something that it's hard to explain. And you can always say that we're not sure if they can hear, but it cannot hurt to talk to that person who is about to die. You can hold their hand if you're comfortable, and you can talk to them, and potentially they can hear you if there's anything you feel that you need to say to them. I always prepare with the five senses before they go visit somebody, whether it's at home or it's at the hospital. Five senses. So what are they going to hear? Are there alarms beeping? Are there people talking? Are there people crying? What are they going to smell? Is there a certain alcohol wipes that are being utilized on IVs? So it's important to help them understand what they're going to see before they go. And also, I always think it's helpful to know that when somebody is actively dying, they may hear gurgling sound. And I've had kids get really scared thinking that the person is choking, and just preparing them for those sounds that somebody may be gurgling, but they're comfortable. The doctors and nurses are taking really good care and making sure that that person is not in any pain. Making memories is extremely helpful prior to a death occurring as well, because kids sometimes feel like, am I going to forget that person? So creating a journal as a keepsake, creating a memory box, validating all these thoughts and all these feelings can stay with them through these hands-on activities. If there's a picture book, they can engage in looking at the pictures and remembering them and knowing that they're always going to be in their heart. Sometimes kids want to know, well, can I take a piece of them with me to keep with me? And I say, well, it depends on who the person is and if the family is open to it. You can always have a lock of hair that you put in a small jar. You can always take a name band if there's a name band with them, and you can put it in that special box. You can do handprints, thumbprints. It's all parent appropriate depending on the situation and what is going on. But there are keepsakes that the kids can have a piece of them, whether or not they bring a teddy bear to the person and they take a teddy bear home. And we can also talk about how we're going to celebrate their life and how we're going to remember them, and discussing that. If you're going to plant a tree to honor your loved one, or how you're going to celebrate holidays, and providing them with that emotional support, giving them choices. Children may not feel like they have any choices going on right now, but they can have a choice whether or not they want to go see the person before they dies, and whether or not they want to be able to say goodbye to the person, or they want to find another way, giving them those choices and offering them breaks. I oftentimes am the person who can be the break person for the family. And I will go and I will tell the child that if you're going to go visit the person and say your goodbye to them, that you can take a break and that's okay. You can leave the room. We can go into the room. You can say what you want to say, and it is okay to lead. It's always important to clarify any misconceptions that they have had and provide the active listening for them. Next. So I will talk a little bit about some case scenarios to help you understand a little bit about how I provide support to children for various reasons. So some ways that I provide preparation for a death. So if I were to get this phone call from a parent or from somebody that a 21-year-old cousin John was in a car accident and he's been pronounced brain dead. John's cousins are Mia, age 5, and Chris, age 9, who are very close to him. Mia and Chris are at home waiting to see John at the hospital to say goodbye before the breathing tube is removed. So, first, the way I would handle these situations is I always have a private conversation with the caregiver separate from the children to understand first in an intake phone call about Mia and Chris's understanding of why they're going to the hospital, and discuss the words that I would utilize with the children when describing what is going on. I would offer to explain to Mia and Chris in age appropriate language that John was in a car accident and was severely injured. The doctors did everything that they could to try to help make him better, but the injuries to his brain and his body are not being able to be saved, and he has died. Those concrete, clear explanations. Chris's brain is the computer to his body. It controls everything. And his brain was hurt too bad that they could not help it or fix it and make it better. So he has a special breathing tube in his mouth that is keeping his body breathing. but his body is not actually alive. He's not in any pain. And when the doctors take out that breathing tube, he will not be breathing anymore. And he has officially died. So I always talk with parents on intakes about how I would talk about it, how I can help them talk about it to help them understand the role of the child life specialist. And also, I explained to the parents that a 5 and 8-year-old are on different developmental levels. So a 5-year-old may be okay with a simple explanation, but ready to move on and to play and take a break, versus a 9-year-old will need a little bit more information and support. And so talking about meeting with the kids together, but also separate for age appropriate reasons, and explaining what the death means to them. So when John's body died, there was nothing working. His heart is not beating, his lungs are not breathing, his brain is not thinking or controlling everything. John cannot open his eyes, he cannot talk, he cannot hear, and it will look like he's sleeping, but he has died. Explaining to the age appropriate ways, the understanding. I would also read age appropriate books to clarify misconceptions that they may have, and assessing their coping and if they need a break. I would talk about that with the parents. There are some books that are appropriate for children. One of them that I often use is called I Miss You, which looks like this for younger children. And so it's helpful to kind of start with a book and have that open-ended conversation. And then I would offer for Chris and Mia to go to the hospital and say their goodbyes to John's body, but making sure that they understand that he is dead and that it's just his body, and making sure I show them pictures of the tube and what they're going to see when they go. Helping them to see ahead of time puts the images in live time versus just using words, and that could create more misconceptions. So sometimes somebody at the hospital can take a picture of what that breathing tube looks like, what the machines look like, to help them understand what they're going to be walking into, and giving them a choice to go to the hospital. And it's okay that they want to go, but if one of them were to say they didn't want to go, that is okay, as long as they have had time to process the loss and be able to say goodbye in a different environment and a different time, and having that closure. When they go to visit, it's important that I have, we're going to take a quick break. Sorry, guys, to admit some people from the waiting room. All right. So those joining, we're just talking a little bit about a case scenario, about how a child life specialist myself would support in preparation for a death of a loved one. And so when these two children are going to the hospital, it's important that they have that comfort person so they know that they can leave a room if they need to. And usually that would be myself. I would offer to go, and I would offer for them to, first, you can go in the room and you can see him. You can hold his hand if you want. If you want to tell him something, or if you want to give him a picture we drew, that's all you have to do. And if you're ready to leave after that, that's all right. And I can walk out with them as well. And so I explained to them that when they see John and that breathing tube is keeping his body alive, even though he's been officially declared brain dead, that I make sure I tell them that everything that made John is always in their heart. That personality of who he was is no longer in that body, but is always going to be with them. And that right now it's just his body and it's in their heart, all those thoughts and feelings that they had. I provide them with hands-on activities to help and support them during their visit as well. So like I mentioned, they could go to the room and they could have a drawing that they want to hang up. They could go and they could give him a special teddy bear, or it's a certain memory that they had. So giving them those hands-on activities, so it's not just talking going into the room, they actually have age-appropriate activities to do. If the family is comfortable, we can engage in family activities of creating a family tree with the handprints, as you can see on the screen. Everybody can participate in that. You can leave a teddy bear with one, and that John you kiss and you leave with John, and the other kids take home. There's also pendants that can be made. You get the handprints or the fingerprints. And then off of Etsy, there's a lot of vendors that create keepsakes, as well as something that I can do with the family as part of a therapeutic activity to help them engage with. Next. All right. So when I get a phone call sometimes that somebody has already died and they've already potentially had the funeral, but the kids are having a really hard time. That often can happen. And so this is what I would do in this situation. So, for instance, Mia had stage 4 breast cancer and died at home on hospice. And her husband Brad called me to ask for support for his 2 children. There is one that is 9 and one that is 8. And now these 2 children are in the same developmental age, which is helpful when providing support. But Jeff and Carter already had that age appropriate understanding that their mom had breast cancer and that they had died. So, like before, I always start with the intake phone call and talking with the adult about what Jeff and Carter's understandings was about their mom's death. What words were used? How was it explained? Was it explained and they really understand it, so that I can always provide that continuity of language and making sure that I am being respectful of already what was taught to them, but also helping to further support them. I also talked to the parents about what the kids were involved with. Did they see their mom die? Did they go to the funeral? Did they go to a wake? So what have they already participated in? Because that helps me to better support the children and meet them where they're at, and kind of just be a continuation of the support that they may have already had. I discussed the interventions that help Jeff and Carter process their mom's death. I would begin with an age appropriate story. Possibly, I would tell the parent about the memory box, as you can see the picture on the screen. And I would have an open conversation to learn more about their perspective. So starting with a book can kind of open that conversation and allow them to engage with me about what they already know, so I can also hear it from them. I would explain. I begin sometimes an activity as well. I tell the parents about a kind of like a break the ice activity with Play-Doh. So I would give each child a color of Play-Doh. So say they would have 2 colors, one that's red and one that's blue. And I would explain that you would start by taking that red Play-Doh and it represents you. So what is one letter or picture that represents you? And then what's one thing with the other color that represents the person that's died? So in this situation, their mom. Now, say you have like a C for one and an L for another, and that's what the person and the children did to represent each person. Then you're going to tell them to mix those 2 Play-Dohs together, those 2 colors, and they've blended. And now create that into a heart. And then ask, can you take apart one color and not the other? No, it's really hard. The colors are blended together, just like you and your mom. You're always going to be connected and you're always going to be blended together as one. You can't take one piece and not have the other. Other activities that I talk about with the parents are all the dissolving paper that you could put in bubbles, and you can blow the bubbles up in the sky, and the picture that they drew on it or the letters or the thoughts that they had about their parent can be dissolved in that bubble solution, creating stones for the garden and having conversations about it. So I always have a very general conversation with the parents to discuss all the possibilities of what I can offer and what I can do, but everything is always adjusted based on my assessment as well with the children when I actually work with them. And so then I meet with Jeff and Carter and engage with them in their preferred activities. So first, if I'm going to meet them for the first time, maybe we'll be doing some Legos together, because Dad told me they love Legos. So first I would start kind of just playing a little bit, getting them comfortable with me and seeing what their personalities may be like, and asking them some questions about, who they are and what there is going on. And then asking them, do you know why I came today? And I explained that I came because my job is to help kids who have had a mom who has died. And then asking them, well, did your mom die? Can you tell me a little bit about it? So I kind of approach it very non-threatening and very gentle with them, and kind of allow Jeff and Carter to share the thoughts related to their mom's death. And through that, I'm clarifying those misconceptions while validating their various feelings. I could discuss with them some interests that they had with their mom and hobbies to kind of learn a little bit about who they were and what they did with their mom. And then also, if they told me that their mom loves gardening, well, we talk about how we could create garden stones and we can plant a butterfly bush. And that area is a safe place that they can go and read to their mom, and they can pretend, think about their mom and celebrate her life together as a family. So those are all great memory making activities to do. And after that, kind of just talking about, well, now you have your garden, you have your stones, and we've talked about mom. So is there something else that we could do? Absolutely. We can do the dissolving papers that you kind of call wish paper, and you write on it, and then you can light it and it flies up into the sky. So we can have, weekly dinners in the garden celebrating their mom. And there's lots of different ways to have those hands-on activities to help them through play understand the death of their loved one. Next. Sometimes I'll get a phone call of a parent asking to help support their child through a funeral. Sometimes I just do conversations over the phone and have a telehealth appointment and discuss how to support children through a funeral. But I'm also more than happy to attend funerals with children to be the neutral person and the support person present. Um, I will meet with the family prior to the funeral to get to know the child and kind of become a safe person for them and help them understand that I'm going to be going with them to the funeral and explaining to them what it means. But I always want to understand first what the funeral is going to look like. Is there going to be an open casket? Is there going to be a cremation? What's the religious component? So I can meet the family where they're at and know how I'm properly supporting them. There are a lot of age appropriate books as well as one on the screen, The Funeral. And there's other ones involved as well. And if they're young children, you can always engage in play first and play out that funeral and maybe use animals for it and see how the kids respond to that play first. So those age appropriate books are really helpful conversation starters. Also, religion plays an aspect in it. And that's really important to respect the family and helping them with those concrete explanations, as well as respecting any religious aspect to it. I always make sure that the parents know their children should have a choice to go to the funeral, and knowing that when they go, it's important to have that safe person, such as myself or someone else, identified. So if they need to take a break, maybe they go in for a little bit and then they leave and they go back in and they leave. And if they choose they really don't want to go, it's okay. And I can work with the children at home to make sure that they are processing their feelings and coping okay and handling the situation. Always bring a comfort item to the service. Maybe they've made their own little worry stones that they're going to hold in their pocket, or maybe they have a favorite t-shirt or a teddy bear or something with them, because that nervous energy, sometimes you need to just focus on something else and have something in your hands. Explaining to the children what they're going to see, those five senses again. What are they going to see at the service? What are they going to hear? What is their role in it? And maybe they can be a part of the funeral planning. Could they be a part of choosing the music that's played during it? Can they help create a picture collage? So helping them be a part of it can also be extremely therapeutic for them as well. Next. I've mentioned a lot about different interventions for hands-on activities that I provide to children when they have lost somebody and somebody has died. And so I wanted to kind of summarize in a little bit more detail these different interventions that I provide. Some of them are provided one-on-one, some are provided with the families present, and some are provided in some groups that I have offered as well, remembering loved ones. So first, I'm not sure if you're familiar with flying wish paper, but it is some special paper that you can order off Amazon. And this is what the box looks like. And you take the paper and it's this little, like almost tissue paper, and you have the kids write on it with a special pencil, and then they roll it up almost like a candlestick, and it sits on the little mat that you can see in the picture, and you light it and it kind of goes up into the air and then it dissolves into like little ashes. It's an indoor activity, but I found that really beneficial. I did that at a bereavement group, and a 16-year-old, it was the first time that child or teenager in many years had actually cried and let out her feelings by watching the letter that she wrote kind of go up into the air and dissolve. And so it can be powerful for some. A feeling sand art. So this can be utilized for children individually, for groups about loss. Each color can represent a feeling or a memory. So when you first found out that your dad died, how did you feel? Oh, you felt sad. Okay, what color represents sad? Was it a lot sad? Was it a little sad? When you first, were missing your dad, were you feeling scared at all? What were your feelings associated with that? And putting the sand to the color and asking them to say if it's a lot or a little. And so the sand jar will have either a lot of one color or a little of one color. It can also represent a memory. So what was your favorite memory? What was something you did for each holiday? And so it's doing the activity, but also allowing them to share with one another if they feel comfortable, or they can just, internalize it and do it privately. The broken pot is one that I've done with families. So you have a pot, everyone writes something on it about the person, and then you can take turns smashing it. Now, don't smash it too much because it makes it really hard to go back together. But you talk about how your family or your heart, it feels broken. You feel grief is everything feels like it's shattered. And how is it ever going to go back together? Well, the way it was initially is how it used to be and how you used to feel. But now in time, you're going to be able to glue everything back together, and your pot looks a little bit different. However, you came back together and everything heals in time. Memory lanterns I did with a family. You can write on the jar itself with a permanent marker, and then with Mod Podge and tissue paper, decorate the jars. And you can share with the family that they can light them at a set time each evening, and they can share a memory or a thought, or it can just be something silent that that you're lighting your lanterns to represent your loved one. Memory boxes are great for a lot of ages, because if the kids don't have a lot of language or are able to articulate their thoughts, through the decorating of the box to represent the person, colors, pictures, items, toys, they can do it and know that it represents somebody. The inside of the box can have special keepsake, pictures, toys if it was a child, clothes, and things like that. And there's a lot of these also can go with a book. So it's a great book plus intervention. The memories ornament I did with around the holidays. And so inside the ornaments, I had the children look at the different pom-poms and beads, and each of those represented a memory. And so they would pick up a bead and they would share their favorite memory of the person. The ribbon is inside of it. Each one has different colors. And they talked about, I felt sad when, I felt happy, something that makes me scared or worried. So they put those ribbons in each time they talk about it. There's paper that was cut long length, and then they rolled it up, and it kind of created a little ribbon on the inside, and on that paper was written maybe a private message or a word that represents the person. And so those ornaments are something they could hang in their house to help them remember the person, but also nobody else knows what each color represents, so it's kind of private. And if they don't celebrate the holiday that involves an ornament, they can also use it as something they hang in the window to represent a loved one. Broken hearts is a great activity to start a group. It's a puzzle piece. So every table has a piece of the puzzle of the heart, and each family or each child will write something on it. And then together as a group, you put the puzzle back together and talk about everybody is here because a heart was broken. But in time, we're going to be able to, connect it again. And you can use Band-Aids for the kids to kind of stick the heart back together. A dissolving paper that can also be purchased off of Amazon. And it's just these little papers, and I have the kids write something on it, draw something on it. And then you can either, if the family likes to go to the ocean, you can watch it wash away in the ocean, as well as putting it in bubbles. I did that with some young children who drew it, and then they said that they were blowing bubbles to their daddy, and their daddy was going to catch it. And so it's kind of like a hands-on, but also a visual for them. And that journal keeping for the right kids is really helpful to talk about. They're afraid they're going to forget their memories. But if they write it all down, or if they draw pictures in time, they're going to have that grief journal. Next. I want to conclude by talking about some words to avoid when describing death to children. I always try to help parents understand in a respectful manner the word choice, which is why I talked about concrete, clear explanations to saying someone died, someone has died, instead of saying in a better place. Because kids then say to me, well, why didn't I get to go to that better place? Why did they get to go? In the clouds. Well, they're in the clouds. And so I had a 5-year-old ask me when they were going on the airplane if they were going to look out in the cloud and see the grandmother. So in the clouds is very abstract to them. And they actually sometimes tell me that they're going to go look for them in the airplane. Gone, but where did they go? Instead of saying they have died and they're in, at the cemetery, and that's where we're going to go visit their body. Passed away where? With God. Well, why did God choose them but not me? Why does God like them? Why does God not like me? So even though it sometimes does get tricky when you put certain cultures and certain religious aspects to it, I'm very respectful of it. But I do want to make sure that the parents and the caregivers understand that concrete explanations are helpful and beneficial for the children, depending on their ages and stages of development. Next. So I talked a lot about how I provide support to children and families in home, as well as I can provide groups. You can refer families to me for help through an email. I do have a website and a phone number. I will travel, throughout Connecticut. I am centralized by Madison on the shoreline, but I have traveled outside of that area to support families. And like I did mention, I do telehealth and phone consults to sometimes just guide the families as well. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions or things that I can clarify or answer for you? So one saying, what words would you use? But words related to what? Can we do? Explain death to a child. What words would I use to explain? Do I use to explain death to a child? Somebody asked. Um, so depending on the ages and stages of development, I always start by explaining the cause of death. So if somebody had an illness or were sick, I talk about the part of their body that was sick and what the doctors did and what medicine was utilized, and I explain that in age appropriate language. And then if there was no more medicine, or if they couldn't be helped, then we talk about what happens when somebody can't get the medicine and it can't help them, and that they've died. And that's when you talk about the body part. So what does death mean? It means that you're no longer breathing. It means that you no longer can talk, your heart stopped beating, and you kind of just go through that whole process of it. If it was a trauma, talking about how you were injured or they were hurt, and if it was their brain, if they're brain dead, their brain no longer works. The brain is the controller of the whole body, and if we can't fix it, that means that they've died. So always a simple, but start by what's the source of death and why did it happen, and then what does death mean, and kind of open-ended questions, and always asking them too, well, what do you know about death? What does death mean to you? Because sometimes kids have a really good concrete understanding of it, but also sometimes they've watched a lot of TV shows, and so they don't understand that death is permanent. And so sometimes that's really hard for them to understand, that they're not going to see them alive again. I hope that helps. You're welcome. Anybody else have any other questions or things that they've been working with and I can help answer? Parent in hospice. So it depends on why the parent is in hospice. Parent in hospice. So if they were really sick, if they had an underlying illness, talking about that and kind of just slowly approaching what is going to be happening. So making sure that when they go visit, they know why their parent is in hospice first. And just you kind of slowly, if you have the time, being able to create those memory and keepsake activities as a family. Sometimes the parent is alert enough on hospice. And so they're able to kind of participate in helping them plan their funeral, as hard as that is. Sometimes kids are appropriate to be a part of the funeral planning. But when I work with hospice families with children, I always make sure that they have the choice to go and visit, making sure that they are participating in legacy and keepsake items and knowing what it's going to look like. So, what's going to happen to that parent as they slowly die? Are they going to become less alert and aware? And so being able to help them understand every step of the way, each time they're going to go, helping them understand what they're going to see, and always giving them the choice to visit and engage in a hands-on activity in that room so that it's not just sitting and kind of feeling uncomfortable. And then, do I have any specific suggestions for explaining death of a dad to a child who died when the child was 14 months old? So if the child is currently 14 months old, um, I'm not sure if that's if it was in the past that dad died and they were 14 months and they're not anymore, or are they still 14 months currently? So if suggestion that was a child is now 4. So kind of the same thing. So if the dad died when the child was younger, and I always say to parents, for instance, like if a child is young and their parent or somebody has died, grief is a process, right? It doesn't just end. It's going to change through age. So as the child gets older, they're going to start to ask more questions. So at 4 years old, I'm not sure why, the dad had died, but if they died and this is something that the child can understand, if it was an illness, if it was an accident, if it was an unexplained death, helping them understand that your dad had this happen and he died, and they want to maybe understand and remember their dad. That's probably a hard thing too, because at 4 they want to know where their dad is. Is there somewhere that they can go visit their dad, if this is cemetery still available, somewhere local to them, going to visit and reading the books. So like I mentioned before too, like, so you're kind of backtracking a little bit at 4. So like, oh, your dad had died, he died because, but instead of even starting with that, you can kind of start with the book like I mentioned before, I Miss You, which is a great introduction book to death, and it kind of talks about a character. So if you were to read a book and be like, oh my goodness, this person in this book has somebody that has died. Do you know someone who has died? Yeah, you're right. Your dad died. Why did your dad die? Oh, yep, your dad died because X, Y, and Z. Do you know what that means? Yeah, because your dad's not here. But how do we remember him? How do we celebrate him? And I'm sure you may want to know about him. So maybe creating a memory box that an adult helps him or her remember who their parent was. Also, something very sad happening is a toddler's guide. Sorry, my screen's blurry. A toddler's guide to understanding death. But like I said, at that age for 4, books are my go-to, because you start reading the book and the kids can't read yet typically at 4. So if the character was a woman and they lost their mom, you can kind of talk about how this character lost their mom died, or if it's a male, their dad, and kind of changing the words a little bit around to meet the needs of that child. But reading the book and saying, this person has a dad died. Did your dad die? And kind of opening it up, that conversation, and just doing the grief activities and the memory making activities now, with the child's learning about their parent through somebody else, but they're still grieving that they don't have their dad. If there's anything else I can answer about that, let me know. And I'm always available by email if there's specific questions that people have, or a phone call. If there's something afterwards that comes up and you want to understand more, I'd be more than happy to talk with anybody about something that's been going on, or some ideas, because some things are so specific to the families that I sometimes need more information about the child's development, the child's understanding, and their behavior, because ages kind of change depending on how mature of a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old they are and what they've been through. Anybody else have any questions? I really appreciate you guys coming today and listening. You're very welcome. I appreciate it, guys. But like I said, feel free to always email me or call if anybody works in an area that they would like some more brochures. I have brochures and cards as well. And I'm more than happy to talk to anybody through any cases or situations or ideas.